I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just sat there while the COO slid the paper across the table, acting like the 3 years I'd spent building their best-selling formula were nothing more than a line item to erase. He thought I'd break, or beg, or shrink into silence. Instead, I walked out with the one thing he never bothered to understand, something he assumed the company owned but never actually read closely enough to claim. If you want more stories like this, subscribe and tell me in the comments what you would have done. I knew something was wrong the moment Darren's assistant emailed me with the subject line, "Brief Discussion." Nobody in corporate ever uses the word brief unless they're about to cut something, your budget, your team, or your throat. Still, I walked into that glass-walled conference room like any other day, carrying the quiet confidence of a woman who had built the very product that kept our company floating. Darren was already seated, tapping his pen like he had more important places to be. He didn't bother with small talk. He didn't offer water. He didn't even look at me. Just pushed a cream-colored document across the table as if distance could soften the blow. Effective immediately, he said, your annual compensation will be adjusted to $92,000. His tone was flat, the kind of corporate monotone people use when they want to pretend they're being professional while delivering a wound. I didn't touch the paper. I didn't blink. "You're cutting my salary in half," I said. My voice didn't shake, though the fluorescent lights above me buzzed like they were trying to fill the silence he left. Darren leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head as if he had just made a strategic chess move. "We're aligning compensation with current market conditions. You should be grateful we're keeping your position at all. Many companies would eliminate entire R&D roles during this kind of restructuring." Restructuring, the word people like him love to hide behind. I finally lifted the document. My original salary wasn't listed anywhere, just the new number, a paragraph of sterile justification, and a signature line at the bottom waiting for implied obedience. "And my royalty agreement?" I asked. "That handshake deal with Evelyn is void, legally meaningless," he said, waving a hand as though erasing 7 years of my work were as simple as brushing crumbs off a table. Evelyn Drake, the founder who had hired me, mentored me, trusted my research. She'd told me, plainly and sincerely, that if I ever created something that transformed the company, I would share in that success. She kept her word. The COO replacing her had no intention of doing the same. I looked at him then, really looked. Darren Cole wasn't a scientist. He wasn't a product creator. He wasn't even particularly competent. He was a corporate opportunist who'd climbed up 3 reorganizations and 2 acquisitions simply because he played golf with board members who couldn't explain the difference between collagen and caffeine. "The regenerative complex," I said, "the one driving over 70% of our premium revenue. You're dissolving my share of that?" "Those formulas belong to the company, developed here, using our labs, on our time. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." He picked up his phone, not to check an urgent update, just because his attention span for people he didn't fear was about 11 seconds. That was the moment something in me shifted. Not anger, not panic, something colder. A quiet defiance he didn't see coming. I signed nothing. I stood, letting the squeak of the cheap chair punctuate the moment. "Are we done here?" I asked. He didn't even look up as he said, "We are." He had no idea what he'd just set in motion. I walked out of that conference room without looking back, but the anger didn't hit me until the elevator doors closed and I saw my reflection staring back. Calm face, steady breathing, eyes sharper than I'd felt in months. If Darren expected tears or pleading, he was going to be disappointed for a very long time. I pressed the button for the basement, the unofficial R&D graveyard, where they'd tucked me away years ago when they decided my work didn't need sunlight or ventilation or recognition. The lab was colder than usual when I stepped in, humming with machinery that hadn't been updated since before the rebrand. Half the equipment still carried barcode stickers from previous owners, but it was mine. Every breakthrough I'd made for Aurora Derma had come from this forgotten corner. Every stabilization test, every reformulation, every late-night adjustment I'd done while executives upstairs toasted investor confidence I had single-handedly earned for them. My workbench was untouched. My blue lab journal sat exactly where I left it, the thermal stamping on its spine reflecting the overhead lights. 7 years of innovation lived inside that book. Ratios, failures, wins, calculations I developed long before I ever signed an employment contract. They treated this place like a storage closet. I treated it like a sanctuary. I opened the journal to a random page, entry from my doctoral research, time-stamped, dated, undeniably mine. They'd never asked to review it. Darren didn't even know it existed. He just assumed everything a scientist touches belongs automatically to the company. Most executives do. Most of them have never read a contract past the benefits section. I pulled out my phone and started photographing each page, slow, careful, methodical. Not because I needed proof for myself, but because I knew exactly how this would play out. Companies like Aurora Derma don't realize what they've lost until they're trying and failing to reproduce it. That's when they panic. That's when they start making accusations. I wasn't going to give them an inch. Every page, every calculation, every formulation, documented by the person who created them. The pages turned quickly at first, then slower as my hand steadied with purpose. Not revenge, not yet. Just clarity. With each photograph, I felt a piece of that power Darren thought he had over me slip away. By the time I reached the final entries, recent refinements, alternate peptide combinations, comparative stability charts, I knew with absolute certainty that I didn't owe Aurora Derma another minute of my time or another drop of my talent. When I finished, I placed the journal gently into my bag. Then I scanned the room for my personal items. The small, succulent Evelyn gave me after my first successful batch run, my backup goggles, the white mug with fading letters that read, "Formulators do it better," and a handful of pens I'd bought myself because the company ones always ran dry before the month ended. I found a cardboard box near the recycling bin and packed everything in silence. Not sadness, just the kind of silence that settles in right before something monumental shifts. On my way out, I passed the framed mission statement Aurora Derma hung years ago, the one about respecting innovation. It had always felt like a joke. Now it felt like a warning they should have taken seriously. I didn't turn in my badge. I placed it on HR's desk next to the unsigned salary cut form and said only, "Tell Darren I'm done." The woman behind the desk blinked at me, confused. She had no idea what those words were about to mean for all of them. I drove home with the cardboard box in my passenger seat, my badge no longer clipped to my coat, my future strangely quiet and wide open. The late afternoon sun in Austin flickered between buildings as I merged onto Riverside, the kind of light that makes everything look half-finished, half-promising. I should have felt panic, quitting a stable job with no backup plan, but instead there was a steadiness in my chest that felt almost dangerous. When I got home, I set the box on the kitchen table and opened my laptop. For the first time in years, I wasn't logging into company servers or updating lab notes. I was searching for something far more important, the truth inside my employment contract. I pulled the digital file up and scrolled past the generic onboarding pages until I reached the thick paragraphs most employees skim. I read every word twice, and there it was, sitting in plain sight, hiding behind legal phrasing no one bothers to challenge. Non-compete clause. 18 months, prohibits direct employment with competitors. But licensing intellectual property I owned prior to employment? Not restricted, not mentioned, not even hinted at. The company had usage rights to the formulas I provided, but nowhere did it say they owned the underlying science. They never asked for an assignment. They never required a transfer. And the base, technology, the delivery system that made the regenerative complex work, came straight from my doctoral thesis. Documented, public, mine. They'd cut my salary in half. They'd erased my royalties. They'd assumed I would swallow it. They had never imagined I might walk away holding the very foundation of their entire product line. I opened a new tab and began researching cosmetic companies outside Aurora Derma's orbit. I knew the industry well enough to predict who was desperate, who had capital, and who lacked the one thing I could offer. A breakthrough they couldn't replicate. 12 companies went on the list, then 6, then two, but only one stood out as the perfect storm: Solstice Bioskin. Bigger distribution than Aurora Derma, better brand reputation, enough money to acquire anything they wanted, but no signature product strong enough to lead the market. They'd tried and failed, repeatedly. I drafted an email, deleting and rewriting until it was stripped down to the essentials: who I was, what I'd built, what I owned, and that I was willing to discuss exclusive licensing rights. I hovered over the send button, thinking of Darren leaning back in his chair like he had checkmated me. He really had no idea who he was dealing with. I pressed send. My finger barely left the mouse when my stomach tightened, not with regret, but anticipation. I expected to wait at least a day, maybe two, before hearing anything back. Instead, my laptop pinged 21 minutes later, a reply from Solstice's chief science officer. "Can you be in our Atlanta office tomorrow at 1?" I stared at the screen, the words crisp and decisive. It wasn't the timing that startled me. It was the decisiveness, the recognition, the urgency. They knew exactly what my email meant. And Aurora Derma had no idea a storm was already forming around them. I closed my laptop slowly, the air in my apartment feeling different now. Charged, heavier, full of direction. Darren had taken my salary, my royalties, and my dignity for a moment, but I still held the one thing he overlooked: power they never thought I had the courage to use. I grabbed my keys. I had packing to do. Tomorrow, everything changed. I didn't sleep much that night, not because of fear, but because my mind kept replaying the email from Solstice. People don't respond that quickly unless they're hungry, and hunger in the cosmetics world always means one thing: leverage. I boarded the morning flight to Atlanta with a single carry-on and my blue journal tucked safely in the inner pocket. It felt heavier than usual, like it understood its own worth. When the plane landed, the Georgia humidity wrapped around me like a reminder that I was far from Aurora Derma now. Far from Darren, far from their basement lab, far from the ceiling they thought I'd never break through. Solstice Bioskin's headquarters stood tall on the edge of Midtown, a modern glass tower that practically shouted confidence. Checked in at security and was escorted to the 18th floor, where the air shifted from clinical corporate to something sharper: ambition, innovation, expectation. The elevator doors opened, and a woman with silver-streaked curls and clear, analytical eyes was waiting. "Catalea?" she asked, extending her hand. "I'm Dr. Maya Klein." No assistant, no formality, no pretense. She came herself. That told me everything. She led me straight past the conference rooms and into their R&D lab, a spacious, bright floor that looked like what Aurora Derma always promised investors but never delivered. Equipment I'd only seen in trade magazines gleamed under LED panels, organized and maintained with the kind of reverence real scientists understand instinctively. "Show me," she said without ceremony. I opened my journal on the clean bench, a deliberate act, not rushed, not flashy. I turned to the stabilized collagen accelerator sequence, the one Aurora Derma built their entire marketing campaign around without ever grasping what made it viable. Maya leaned closer as I traced the modified delivery system with my fingertip. "This is the key," I said. "Everything else is window dressing. Without this, degradation happens within 4 hours." She didn't interrupt. She didn't pretend to understand more than she did. She listened. That alone put her miles above Darren. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "And this predates Aurora Derma?" "Documented in my thesis," I said. "Published, time-stamped." A flicker of something, respect, maybe relief, crossed her face. She led me upstairs to a boardroom with a panoramic view of the city, where 3 people were waiting: Jordan Vance, General Counsel, Lila Park, VP of Product, and Rowan Hale, the CEO. Rowan stood when I entered. Darren never had. "Catalea," he said warmly, "we've heard a lot about your work. Maya says what you brought us is industry shifting." I didn't bother hiding the slight smile that tugged at my mouth. It felt good to be treated like someone whose intelligence mattered. I laid out the situation: Darren's salary cut, the erased royalties, the misuse of my work, the contractual loophole they failed to close. No bitterness, no dramatics, just truth sharpened into a blade. Jordan took notes quickly, occasionally stopping to clarify details. "You're certain," he asked, "that the base IP belongs to you?" "Absolutely," I said, "and I'm prepared to defend it." Rowan leaned back, thoughtful but energized. "What do you want, Catalea?" The question landed with weight. Not "what are you offering?" Not "what will it cost us?" But what I wanted. For the first time in years, someone was seeing me, not as a replaceable employee, not as a data point, but as a force. I told them. Licensing rights, royalties, a role that respected the level of innovation I brought. The room absorbed it, considering every angle. Then Rowan nodded once. "Let's talk numbers." And just like that, the balance of power shifted permanently away from Aurora Derma and toward the people who recognized the value Darren tried to cut in half. Rowan didn't waste time with theatrics. Once I stated what I wanted, upfront payment, royalties, and a real position, they exchanged glances with that quiet, calculating excitement you only see when people realize they're standing in front of the missing piece of their entire strategy. Jordan leaned forward first. "What's your number?" he asked, voice steady, professional, but with an undercurrent of anticipation. I had spent the flight rehearsing the figure in my mind, adjusting it upward, downward, weighing the risk, but when the moment came, there was no hesitation. $9.5 million up front, I said. 6% of net revenue from any product built on my formulations, and a director-level role with full independence in research. Maya didn't blink. Lila's eyes sparked. Rowan sat back, tapping a slow rhythm on the table with 2 fingers, not out of doubt but contemplation. He finally said, "Give us 15 minutes." They stepped out, leaving me alone with a glass of water I was too focused to drink. Through the window, the city stretched endlessly, a grid of opportunity and noise. The opposite of Aurora Derma's basement lab. The opposite of being diminished by someone who didn't even understand the science I'd built my life around. My phone buzzed, an email from Aurora Derma's HR system. "Please confirm acceptance of revised compensation." As if I were still sitting in that conference room, obediently signing whatever was put in front of me. I deleted the notification. 15 minutes later, the door opened again. Rowan returned first, stopping across from me with a look that carried something close to respect. "Catalea," he said, "we accept your terms, all of them, pending final legal review." Jordan slid a draft memorandum of terms across the table. "We'll wire the upfront payment once contracts are signed. We'll also provide independent legal counsel to represent your interests." For a second, just a heartbeat, I felt the weight of everything that had led to this. Every late night alone in that basement, every solution I'd wrestled into existence, every moment someone like Darren dismissed my work as replaceable, and then the weight lifted. "Let's move forward," I said. What followed unfolded quickly. Meetings with the attorney they recommended. Contract drafts that went through 5 revisions. My thesis submitted as proof of prior ownership. The verification of timestamps in my lab journal. Every piece clicked into place with a precision I'd never experienced under Aurora Derma. On the 5th day, I signed. The wire transfer hit my account at 3:17 p.m., a series of numbers so large, so unreal, that I stared at them for nearly a full minute before the reality settled. I didn't celebrate, I didn't shout. My reaction was the quiet inhale of someone stepping into power she'd been denied for far too long. 2 hours later, Darren called, then called again, then emailed with the subject line, "Urgent, please respond." I didn't answer. Aurora Derma had made their choice when they cut my value in half. Now they were about to learn what that mistake truly cost them. The first sign that Aurora Derma had realized what they'd lost came 8 days after the wire transfer, when Maya forwarded an email from one of her industry contacts. "They're scrambling," she wrote. Aurora Derma had apparently placed a frantic rush order with a contract lab, trying to reverse engineer the regenerative complex. It would have been almost funny if I didn't know exactly how badly they would fail. They had ingredients, but not the sequence. They had machines, but not the parameters. They had confidence, but not competence. Without the delivery system I built in my doctoral research, all they had was an expensive slurry that fell apart in less than a day. I wasn't surprised when, 3 days later, Solstice's legal team called me into a meeting. Jordan placed a stack of documents on the table, the edges sharp as accusations. Aurora Derma has filed a cease and desist, he said. They're claiming theft of trade secrets, violation of employment agreements, and unauthorized disclosure of confidential materials. For a moment, I pictured Darren pacing in an office somewhere, trying to understand how their flagship product had become unusable overnight. I kept my face calm. Can they win? I asked. Jordan flipped open the packet. Their entire argument hinges on whether you transferred ownership of the core IP. The contract says you didn't. Your thesis is public record. Your journal entries predate your employment. Their filings read more like outrage than legal substance. Still, outrage can be loud, and Aurora Derma was very loud. 2 days later, the court scheduled a preliminary injunction hearing. If the judge sided with them, Solstice would be barred, temporarily or permanently, from using my formulations. It was the kind of power play companies resort to when they fail at everything else. On the morning of the hearing, the courthouse in downtown Austin buzzed with the usual Thursday routine, but inside the courtroom, everything felt sharper, heavier. I sat behind Jordan and Solstice's legal team, my journal sealed in an evidence envelope, the time-stamped entries ready to speak for themselves. Darren sat across the room, looking smaller than I remembered, his confidence replaced by something tighter, thinner, fear maybe, or desperation. Their attorney argued first, insisting that any improvements made during my employment belonged entirely to the company. He spoke loudly, hoping volume would compensate for lack of proof. Then Jordan stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He simply laid out the truth piece by piece. My thesis, the dated entries, the absence of any IP transfer clause, the fact that Aurora Derma had used my formulas for years without ever owning the foundation behind them. When he finished, the courtroom fell into a quiet that felt like held breath. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman named Judge Benitez, turned to Aurora Derma's attorney. "Do you have any document," she asked, "in which Ms. Catalea Moreau explicitly assigns ownership of her pre-existing intellectual property to your client?" Their attorney shifted, cleared his throat, and finally muttered, "No, Your Honor." Judge Benitez nodded once. Motion for injunction denied. The gavel cracked like a bone being set back into place. Darren's shoulders collapsed. Mine didn't move at all. Outside the courthouse, the Texas heat hit my face like sunlight after years underground. The legal war they hoped would break me had only proved one thing. They never understood who they were trying to control. And now they no longer could. 2 weeks after the injunction collapsed in court, Solstice moved into full production. My new lab felt like stepping into an alternate reality. Bright, well-funded, humming with energy instead of fluorescent buzz. Maya had assembled a small team of junior scientists who actually wanted to learn, not just follow instructions. For the first time in years, I wasn't fighting for resources, approval, or space. I was building something with people who understood what it meant to create. We spent long hours perfecting the formulation for Solstice's version of the regenerative complex. It needed to be better than Aurora Derma's, not just equal. Stronger stability, smoother texture, deeper penetration. And when the final batch passed every test with numbers I'd only dreamed of achieving in that basement lab, I knew we had something that wasn't just competitive, it was superior. Solstice named it Revitacell Renewal Serum. Lila handled the launch strategy with a precision that made Aurora Derma's marketing attempts look like high school group projects. The product hit the market in early September. Within 3 weeks, social media flooded with reviews. Dermatologists praised it. Beauty editors called it category-defining. Retailers sold out of shipments in days. Every success notification felt like a soft echo of justice. And then the numbers started hitting the business wires. Aurora Derma's stock dropped 9%, then 14%, then 21%. By the end of the quarter, they had lost almost a third of their valuation. Their board issued a statement about unexpected production challenges and temporary market share volatility, but everyone in the industry knew exactly what had happened. They'd cut the woman who built their leading product, then expected the product to hold itself together without her. When their version began failing stability tests, customers complained about inconsistent texture, shorter shelf life, strange separation. Retailers reported returns surging. The company scrambled, launching discounts, doubling ad spend, pushing rushed batches that looked and felt nothing like the original. Desperation has a smell, and Aurora Derma was drowning in it. The final blow landed in November when the company announced a leadership restructuring. Darren's name appeared at the bottom, resigned to pursue other opportunities. No explanation, no thanks for service, just gone. I read the announcement while sitting at my new workstation, pipette in hand, preparing a sample for an upcoming project Rowan wanted me to lead. Maya walked in a moment later, her expression knowing. "You saw." "I did," I said quietly. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. The satisfaction was quieter than that, deeper, calmer, like a tide turning after years of being pulled the wrong direction. A week later, Rowan visited the lab with the Q4 report. "Your royalties just hit," he said, handing me the printed sheet. I looked down at the numbers. 6% of a wildly successful product, 4 months on the market. More money than I'd ever imagined earning, but it wasn't the number that mattered. It was what it represented. Value recognized, work honored, power returned to its rightful owner. Rowan rested a hand on the table beside me. "Catalea, we'd like to expand your division. Bigger team, more autonomy, whatever you need." I nodded, a quiet certainty settling into me. Let's build something extraordinary. Outside the windows of the lab, Atlanta was cloudy but full of motion. Cars, lights, life. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like something someone else controlled. It was mine, and I intended to use every part of it. I learned something I didn't expect through everything that happened. Knowing my own worth isn't about winning a fight. It's about refusing to stay somewhere that keeps shrinking me. For years, I gave everything to a company that saw my loyalty as a discount, not a value. I stayed quiet, stayed late, stayed grateful for scraps because I thought hard work would eventually be recognized. It took one act of betrayal to realize the truth. People will undervalue you for as long as you let them. The moment I stepped away, I finally saw how much weight I'd been carrying just to make myself small enough to fit inside their expectations. And starting over wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about reclaiming the pieces of myself I'd handed out for free. That's the heart of the value motive, understanding that you teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate. Walking away didn't just expose their corruption. It exposed the parts of me that had settled for less than I deserved. Sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, but sometimes silence is the sharpest knife. The consequences they faced were simply the natural outcome of their own choices. And the practical lesson is simple. In our own lives, we have to stop confusing endurance with loyalty. Staying in places that drain us doesn't make us strong. It makes us disappear. If your workplace, your relationships, or your environment constantly demand that you minimize yourself, that's your sign to reevaluate, not endure. You are allowed to outgrow the rooms that refuse to grow with you. How to get started today. Write down 3 things you bring to the table that no one else can do exactly like you. Set one boundary this week you've been too afraid to enforce. And look at one area of your life where you've been settling, then ask yourself why. If this story resonated with you, comment your thoughts below, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories like this.